I fail, I fall, I hit the floor. I fight the mind, I lose the war. The plan is dead, the old way fails. My brain breaks the rules, it craves the pain. The true fix, it's not a drug, it's grace. Stick around, let's close the gap together.
They said it was too late, that the best years were behind him. But he wasn't done. He was just getting dangerous. This podcast isn't for the overnight success stories. It's for the ones who are still in the middle of the damn fight. The late bloomers, the blue-collar visionaries, the people who refuse to settle. This isn't a comeback. It's a fucking uprising.
Hey guys, welcome back. Another episode of Electrician to Entrepreneur, journey of a 20-year veteran as an electrician to a successful entrepreneur. This week is a continuation or part 2 of the AI versus ADD quandary. And we're exploring the issues that I've been having with ADD, as it were. This initially started last week with a discussion of what it is that I go through as a budding entrepreneur who's newly diagnosed with attention deficit disorder. And so part 1 really kind of works with how I use AI for a lot of the solutions to things that I'm working on in starting up a business, and ultimately how the my attention deficit disorder tends to pull me away from the things that I need to do because I'm working with AI and trying to perfect AI to help me do the things I want to do. So this week we're going to take a deeper dive into the issues of AI versus ADD, but more specifically with my new diagnosis of ADD and coming to grips with this, understanding how we can turn it into a win as opposed to accepting it as a loss. So I want to start by pointing out that the proof of the issue comes with, of course, the failure to publish episode 7 on time. So part 1 of our AI versus AD, the ultimate crux of it all was, of course, that I have ADD, and I'm struggling with coming up with a way to work with to keep my focus and continue to produce the things that I need to produce. You know, whether it's the podcast or it's business related or any such things. And you know, the number one understanding is that we do not want this to become a crutch. We don't want this to become any sort of excuse for why we don't do things, why we can't have, why we can't have results, or that we're some sort of failure. So I want to make this very clear that this is the mindset going into all of this. This is not a loss. In fact, plenty of studies show that most successful entrepreneurs suffer with ADD in some degree. Some are very, there's a lot to understand about what ADD is, as opposed to, the average mindset of ADD is that it in fact is it is a deficiency, but it's just a completely different wiring for the brain. Your brain functions differently if you have ADD than the average person. And the world is designed for someone without. The world is designed on schedules in which you can easily focus. The world is designed for success to happen for somebody that can sit in one place and keep their entire focus without any degree of difficulty on the thing that they need to do. A great way to look at this is that I imagine, if you are to have a job, a W-2 job, the worst job you could have as somebody with ADD is to be on a production line, because the last thing you're going to be thinking about during your job, your job essentially is to do the same thing repetitively over and over and over again, anywhere from 8 to 12 hours a day. In some cases, some people may even be putting in as 14 hours a day. And so the issue here is that you are doing the same exact thing over and over and over and over again. And if your brain is not wired for this becomes a problem, because the last thing that you're really thinking about is the repetitive task that you are actually assigned to do. Your brain is going to think about 100 other things. This is the way that the brain is wired. Now, one might consider this to be a deficiency, and one might consider this to be a problem. But in reality, this is the crux of a creative brain to its maximum. It is the perfect creative brain, because you cannot, the imagination, the ability to think beyond the world, the reality that we all live in, at any given moment, for absolutely, what seemingly no reason. This creates this massive need for creativity. And the creativity, incidentally, doesn't mean just storytelling or music or drawing or artwork or any such thing. The creativity that we're referring to when we refer to creativity is the ability to think beyond the box, right? And we've all heard that phrase before, think outside the box. The perfect person for thinking outside the box is the person with ADD. And so we're going to kind of show what we want to kind of talk about to start part two, is to show the failure to publish on time. The editing became a brutal performance review, showing that, in fact, I cannot just brute force my way through the way that my brain is wired to achieve the results, the ultimate results that I have. And what I want to point out is that in knowing, in coming to terms with that in which you struggle with, let's say you struggle with addiction, coming to terms with that, the real work begins once you have identified what the problem is. So if you identified that you are struggling with addiction, the real work starts with you trying to combat the addiction. You say, whatever it is, there are people who are functioning very well within society, who have conditions like Tourette's, who are to some degree somewhere on the spectrum, and they function fine within society because they have learned that once they've identified how their brain works or how their body works. In a lot of cases, maybe it's a physical issue that someone must work with. Once you've identified that, the real work begins in deciding, in figuring out exactly how it is you work with that. What's important to point out is that everything that I've been doing up till now has been using an old school way of programming, right? That is to say, an old school way of scheduling out my days, an old school way of approaching problem solving, an old school way of approaching new things to learn. And the list goes on. And I've been doing things very much as I've been taught for the last 50 years. And now we begin to understand why I've always had difficulty doing all that. It becomes that much more difficult when you begin to realize that you have a lisp. That lisp seems to stand out even more. This is exactly true. I think it's very important to recognize the psychological aspect of coming to terms with these things, because when you begin to come to terms with them, they stand out so much to you that everything becomes that much harder to do. So hence the big struggle of this past week, not just with publishing the episode, because, so now I'll explain what happened. What essentially what happened was, in the editing, what I felt when I finished recording, what I felt was a fantastic episode. I had high energy. I covered the topics very well. I felt like I didn't stammer much. I noticed it's becoming easier for me to notice the stammering. I stammer a lot in my conversation, in my speech. This is something I need to work on. But we all have to identify where we're coming from before we start approaching the small problems. We have to understand the overall. And so this is part one. But at any rate, so in noticing all these things while going back through the editing phase, I try to remind myself that this is capturing a raw and authentic story of the early days of my success. And I want to point out how important it is. The struggles I'm dealing with now are so that I can allow the person I'm going to be to walk through the door. And I want you to understand that this is the key to success. You have to accept who you're going to be, and you have to begin to act as though you are that person that you're going to be, and just understand that what you're dealing with now is how you became the person that you're going to be. Keep that focused. So while we're talking about all of this, I also want to point out as a secondary tangent, at no point am I giving up. Quit does not enter this conversation. I just had it out with AI, actually, and going over my show notes for this week because it wanted to throw in for my hook. It wanted to throw in that I quit. And it says, when the fuck did I ever quit? I've been consistently working at this. I get angry. I get frustrated. I sometimes have to take a step back. In reality, I take a lot of steps back. You have to protect your energy and you have to protect your psyche. So it is important that sometimes that you do have to take a step back. It's important to understand when you're taking too many steps back. You have to fight through it. You have to continue to fight through it. So it is important to understand that I'm not quitting, that I have never quit, and I won't quit. And that is how we know that I am going through the trials and tribulations today for the person that I'm going to be tomorrow. So essentially, back to what I was getting at, the episode became a real chore, and it took me an additional 24 hours. I was already late by 24 hours in recording. This is because of the fight with AI to produce the show notes. Then it was also because of the frustrations with my ability to record. The software that I use to record the podcast may have been an issue. I was attempting to use different camera angles, as you might have noticed if you watch. We're trying to incorporate different things to try to make the show a little bit more interesting and captivating for trying to garner in and bring in more of an audience. And this is becoming a struggle. So I was late in recording, and then the editing got out of control, and that became another. And so I ended up, I don't know if anybody's keeping score, and I'm sure some are. I like to have the podcast recorded, edited, and produced or published by Monday morning. And I didn't release until Wednesday morning. So it was 2 days off my schedule for episode 7. And so Julie and I are working really hard. I'm giving up the editing. This is the solution. I'm giving up the editing responsibility to Julie. As a matter of fact, she's asked me if I'm changing her title in the credits. And I said, that's up, that's certainly up to her. That is not a big deal to me. She can be called whatever she wants in the credits. I'm open to it. So at any rate, so in producing episode 7, part 1, and realizing that, we are in fact dealing with a whole new set of problems, not new, but newly prioritized. And let's reframe that. We're not dealing with a whole new set of problems. We've now got a brand new opportunity. This is a brand new opportunity, and it's giant. It is huge, and it's probably going to take a lot of who I am, a lot of my time, a lot of my energy. It's probably going to cause the greatest deal of struggle and the greatest deal of pain. But it is going to become the ending result from what I'm reading so far could potentially be the greatest asset that I could ever asked for. So when I sit there every morning and I consider my blessings and I consider that which I should be grateful for, I'm grateful for this. I am struggling like hell, but I'm struggling today so that I can be the person I want to be tomorrow, or the person I'm going to be tomorrow. So what does this mean? What does understanding this now mean? Well, let me explain. If you've worked in the trades, and I know that some of my audience has or continues to, if you've worked in the trades, you know that there's a starting point, a middle point, several middle points. You don't do one thing without considering the things that must come before it. And you certainly do that thing considering what the outcome is going to be for the things that follow. Everything is planned out. So when you go to pull wire, before you pull wire in say, a wood-framed house, before you pull wire, you're going to bore your holes. You're going to lay out your boxes. Actually, you probably want to lay out your boxes and everything so that then you can begin to plan your path for wire. And then after you've planned your path for wire, you bore your holes. Then you pull your wire. Now, at some point in that process, you probably planned out exactly how the circuits are going to go. You're going to wire from this device to that device to that device. Or maybe you're going to wire from this device to the other device and then back to this device. You want to pull your home runs first, or do you want to pull your home runs last? It depends on who you are. I know. I've worked for both. And then after you've pulled all you may want to pull all your wire and then work on stapling and strapping your wire back. Or maybe you want to do that just before you do your trim out. But then you're going to go and do your trim out, right? So you're following the point. You're kind of following my point here is that there is a step-by-step process. If you were to run all conduit, you would follow a similar step-by-step process. If you were to, there's all kinds of different ways to skin a cat, but ultimately you follow a step-by-step process. And there are very strict guardrails, as my AI has put it. There's guardrails in your roadmap. That is to say, there's very little you can do to come off your path in order to achieve your goal. And so what we run into actually is we run into when we have that as with the ADD brain, when we understand that we have attention deficit disorder, our guardrails are in place and they keep us from falling off path and from going too far out. So our brain is wired, and we can actually hyper focus on a particular task and get that done. And we may even come up with more creative paths to run wire that make more sense, or maybe save money, or maybe save time, or maybe we come up with all kinds of other things that in light of all the things that we could do that simplify or make our job easier. This is within the confines of the guardrails to reaching our end goal. This is perfect. However, when you begin to work on building a business, you don't have any guardrails. You can go in any direction you want to go. The thing about building a business, that if you haven't built a business or you don't understand business, the thing about building a business is that there are no rules. Okay, there is things you can do that will most definitely fail, and there are things that you can do that have a lot of potential for success. But there's no rules. You don't have to keep your books a certain way. You don't have to approach your clients a certain way. You don't have to build your business by doing this thing in front of this thing in front of that thing. You don't have to do any of that stuff. In fact, learning what your product is and building around your product and doing all those things that you have to do in order to build business, you can do it any way you want. Now, here's the wonderful thing about having attention deficit disorder: when you have no rules, now your focus can go anywhere. So this creates an ultimate but an ultimate opportunity. When we begin to understand that focusing is not done the same way with attention deficit disorder as it is with somebody that has a typical mind, when you begin to understand that your brain is wired a certain way, you begin to understand that at this point that you can begin to train your mind to focus on the things for as long as you need to, so on and so forth. Maybe it's a good time to point out that lack of focus. See, I'm trying to focus on producing this episode talking about my coming to terms with ADD, and I notice out of the corner of my eye there's an ant crawling on the wall, and so I can't stop thinking about the ant when I'm in fact looking at my notes, and I need to keep focused on my notes, right? So this is the point that I was just about to make before I lost my focus. The thing that I want everyone to understand is that I in fact don't know how to cope with this yet. I know that I need to learn how to cope with it. And so this is fortunate. It brings up an interesting thing. My old boss, it's funny when I refer to him as my old boss, he's younger than I am. But my old boss used to try to get me to read a lot. I have a hard time reading, and now I know why. I have a hard time bringing in information and comprehending. Or I have a hard time comprehending things that I read. And so I'll tend to read things 3 or 4 times. And a lot of times what I do is I just pass over it because of my frustration of not comprehending it. It's not that I don't know what I'm reading. I know exactly what I'm reading. The information as I pass over it is so overwhelmed by some other thought or some other consideration that I just can't store the information that I just read 3 or 4 times. And so it's when you do that, it's not so much that you don't comprehend what you're reading, but rather you can't comprehend it in terms of stored information. I don't know if that's a good way to explain that, but at any rate. So point being is that, reading was very, very much a necessity. Must read. And I want to point out as an editorial note that we are currently 8 minutes over schedule. So once again, I'm going on and on and on. But this time I'm going to go, I'm going to just however long this episode is, it is. 2 parts is 2 parts. If this is an hour and a half, it's an hour and a half. I'm not going to make a big deal out of it. But the point of the reading is that I've actually finally gotten rid of all of my doom scrolling, everything that could possibly steal my attention away. If I go out for a cigarette, I'd be on Instagram. Before it was Instagram, it was Facebook. Reading news stories. I do not want to read the news. Okay. The news I can leave for the end of the day, maybe. The reason I don't want to read the news is negative, right? All the things that are wrong in this world. I can pick up on that stuff through conversation. It's not that I don't want to be educated on what's going on in the world. I don't want to be covered in all of the fake news. I don't want to be covered in all of the opinion. I don't care about any of that shit. What I do care about, and there will come a time when it's necessary for me to understand what's going on in the world around me, what I do care about is how that's going to affect my bottom line as a business owner. I'm not there yet. Right now, I'm working on making sure that I understand who I'm going to be. And so I don't need to know about what Trump is doing, who he's pissing off, or what the left is doing that is absolutely bizarre and out of this world. I don't need to know this, not right now. So I'm not going to read the news. So that's one thing I can't do. So now I'm actually reading. And it's perfect that I can have these books on my phone. I read on my phone because it allows me to read. If I go out to smoke, I take the phone with me. I would doom scroll. Well, now I read. I'm learning. And this is the important thing. And so now I picked up a book, and I'm going to reference this in the description. I'm going to make sure that it's very, very well marked in the description, but I want to point this out. The book is called ADHD 2.0, It's written by Dr. Edward M. Hallowell, MD, and a Dr. John J. Rady, MD. And the reason why I'm bringing this up and the reason why I'm reading this book is that, well, I mean, it's obvious why I'm reading ADHD, right? And the first thing I learned is that we thought that there was a difference between ADHD and ADD. ADHD is the actual term now. It's not. There is no difference between ADD and ADHD. And there's a lot of information within this book that I find to be, I'm only a chapter in. The foreword had me, and I've been reading this for a day. I'm only so don't kill me that I'm only a chapter in. But the point that I want to make, and I just want to point out at this point, right in the forward, I'm like, holy man, I was like skeptical with the idea of the diagnosis. I don't feel like there's anything wrong with me. And again, I want to point out ADD or ADHD, whatever you want to call it. There's nothing wrong. It's different. Right. But this is the mindset. I don't feel like there's anything wrong with me. So there's a skepticism. Right. And then I start reading in the forward. I'm like, oh my God, holy crap. It's like I'm reading all about it's like somebody's finally saying, this is why you do this. This is who you are. And this, so I think, what's fantastic here is that it begins to help me to understand this is, I'm trying to invent structure. And inventing structure is taking something from chaos and giving it form. And in the chaos is the frustration or my kryptonite. And kryptonite, as you know, shuts Superman down. It doesn't kill him. Just keeps him from being able to do anything, right? It's my kryptonite. Chaos is my kryptonite. And so this is interesting because this particular point of the book that this excerpt or these things that I want to read for you are in a section of chapter 1 referred paradoxical tendencies. And I'm going to start right there with chaos triggers my kryptonite. Chaos triggers frustration. I find my frustration from the absence of a business plan, the absence of formal business structure is the chaos. And it is from the chaos that I'm trying to develop structure. And this is where the frustration comes, and the frustration becomes my kryptonite. However, if you were now as a foreman, I thrived on chaos. While everybody is working and doing their job and they're all following their very structured way of doing things, and something would go wrong somewhere, I would fly to that like I was like a moth to a flame. I would thrive in that condition, and I would instantly be able to produce solutions where others saw only problems. This is probably one of the greatest skills that I had, and one of the reasons why I found myself so successful as a foreman. Now, I would like to point out that the tail end of my foreman, the last project I did as a foreman, wasn't going very well, but I should also point out that I was over medicating myself. So, a lot of things were happening. So I would say that if I were sober and I was able to manage things or be able to knock things down into smaller pieces of the pie, which I didn't allow myself that opportunity to do that, then I probably would have been more successful. However, the project still finished. The project still made money. It wasn't fantastic. And we did have a lot of problems with personnel over the course of the 2 years that the project took place. But that's okay, because now looking back at it and now understanding what's going on with me now, I can see and I can learn. So I'm going to read from you some of these paradoxical tendencies, because I think that these are things that, first of all, wandering mind. I mean, my mind wanders like crazy, right? Trouble organizing and planning. This is why I use AI, because I have trouble organizing and trouble planning. Now, I mean, it's not so much in the planning, okay? It is the trouble is called trouble with the executive function. One can take out the trash, and in the time it takes him to walk over to the trash container, he forgets what he's supposed to be doing and slowly ambles right past it. You know, it's not the action of planning or organizing that's the problem. It's the action of doing, of remembering the plan, of remembering the organization, and kind of keeping those things together. So, trouble with time management and a tendency to procrastinate. This is another element of executive function, and quite an interesting one. Those of us who have ADHD experience time differently from other people. This is very important because this, oh my God, I did not know that this was not a thing. I do. I see time differently. I don't understand time in the same concept that normal people do. And I've always kind of found this to be interesting, and I can't even tell you where my mind has brought me on this subject in the past. But this is really hard for most people to believe, which is why people are typically unsympathetic to our problem and ascribe it to lack of effort, a bad attitude, or pure obstinacy. But the fact is we lack an internal sense of the arc of time. We're unaware of the unstoppable flow of seconds into minutes into hours, days, and so forth. Defying the laws of physics, we change the nature of time in our mind. In our world, we have little awareness of the seconds ticking by, few internal alerts, alarms, or cues, no judicious allocation of chunks of time for this, then that, and then the next thing. We short circuit all such complexity by slicing time down to its barest bones. In our world, we recognize only two times, now and not now. We hear we have to leave in a half hour as we don't have to leave right now. The paper is due in 5 days becomes it's not due now. And the 5 days might as well be 5 months. We hear I'll have to go to bed sometime when somebody actually says it's time to go to bed now. Our truncated sense of time leads to all manner of fights, failures, job losses, disappointed friends, and failed romances, but at the same time to an uncanny ability to work brilliantly under extreme pressure, as well as to be wonderfully, infuriatingly oblivious to the time pressures that stress most people to the max. Take, for instance, the fact that I am now 44 minutes into this episode, and that puts me into part 3 of this episode. So I think this is a very interesting excerpt to read, and I think that it's very important. I don't think that the normal mind has any idea what this is like. This is why I don't worry about the time constraints typically. I worry about them in the sense that somebody else is worried about them. I worry about them in the sense that somebody somewhere is saying, why isn't this done yet? When I look at the clock, actually, in terms of how much time has passed on this episode, it is only because I am looking to stay within the constraints of the episode. It is not that I give a shit that I have just talked for 45 minutes. And probably a lot of that hasn't even come close to finishing the subject of what I'm trying to discuss. The fact of the matter is that this 45 minutes that I look at on my clock can probably be whittled down to about 42 by the time this is done being edited. From the coughing and from the drinking of water and etc. And it can probably even be whittled down a little bit more with all the ums, ahs, and other filler words. The fact of the matter is that these things don't concern me. I don't see them in the same way. I'm not thinking of the fact that I spent 46 minutes now just rambling. And I don't see it as one linear piece of conversation. In fact, what's taken place over the course of this 46 minutes, I have talked about 10 different things. I have been in 10 different places. And you probably spent a lot of that conversation going, why is he talking about that? He was just saying how he was going to be talking about this. And you probably find yourself, when I come back, going, how the fuck did we end up back to this subject? It's because we don't think in terms of linear, we think in terms of circular, I guess. This is my observation anyway. This is where I'm coming from. I don't see things, I certainly don't see things in an order. I see them more in a sense of chaos, I guess. At any rate, some other things that, some other paradoxical tendencies, a strong will, stubbornness, and refusal of help. It can seem stunningly stupid. Many people with ADHD, especially men, state outright, I'd rather fail doing it my way than to succeed with help. Now, I will never say that. However, I've struggled in a lot of ways. When I ask somebody for help, I tend to go, you know what? Yeah, no. You know what? I heard the way you want to do it. I think I'll just go back to the way I don't know. Generosity is another tendency. Very, very generous. To a fault. Unique and active sense of humor. Probably nobody listening has found any of the things that I found funny during these last 48 minutes of broadcast, including the fact that I think it's funny that I keep calling out how much time has gone by. It's unique and active. I do have a sense of humor, and I'm laughing on the inside right now. Exquisite sensitivity to criticism and rejection. Yeah, you can tell me how something I'm doing could be done a whole lot better, and what I will tend to, in a lot of ways, what I tend to do is take that personally, as though it's a shot against me. I've been dealing with that my whole life. In some cases, to extremes. Actually, in a lot of cases, to extremes. It can be very, very, very sensitive. And rejection actually is one of the biggest problems that I think I dealt with as a youth. Now I could care less. I mean, it's not entirely true, but now I tend to cope with it a lot better than I did when I was a child and a teenager, even as a young adult. I tend to beat people to the punch because I would see rejection coming along before it was even an option. At any rate, impulsiveness and impatience, an itch to change the conditions of life. As you get older, this tends to manifest as a general dissatisfaction. Does this sound familiar, by the way? As you get older, this tends to manifest as a general dissatisfaction with ordinary life, leading to a need to improve upon it, augment it, supercharge it, ratchet it up several notches. This itch can lead to major achievements or creations, or can lead to addictions of all kinds, as well as a host of other dangerous behaviors. Often it leads to both. Understanding this, knowledge is power. This will lead to major achievements and creations, I promise you. Transparency to the point. Does this sound familiar? Transparency to the point of being honest to a fault. You'd wonder, would somebody with ADD put together a podcast that's more or less like a vlog and tell you exactly everything that they're doing that's wrong with them? If you're listening and you worked with me or you worked under me when I was a foreman or project manager, did you ever wonder to yourself, why is he telling me about that? That's probably not something I needed to know. It's interesting that you're telling me about how much money is being spent or how much money we're going to make or what the owner had to say in the meeting. Why would you tell me that? I don't need to know that. I'm sure if you've ever worked with me, we've had one of those conversations at some point. Susceptibility to addictions and compulsive behaviors of all kinds. I've been there. And a distorted negative self-image, something that I am definitely working on. Let me read about this real quick. Due to the inability to observe oneself accurately, coupled with the heightened sensitivity to perceived criticism and a record of underachievement, people with ADHD usually have a self-image that is far more negative than is warranted. One of our patients calls the condition attention deficit distorter because of how it distorts so many perceptions of reality. While on the one hand, creativity depends upon the ability to imagine a different reality, to distort the ordinary into something better. On the other hand, this distorter can create one of the most painful aspects of ADHD, which is a very low self-regard. We look at ourselves as if in a house of mirrors, not seeing ourselves as others do, seeing only what we regard as failures and shortcomings, all but blind to the upside, which is typically considerable. We suffer shame as we misread ourselves and misread others' responses to us. That's a very important line. We hold back on opportunities and relationships out of that shame, as well as fear and misunderstanding. Again, it is very important. I'm going to say this very, very important. Knowledge is power. I will overcome. I know I will because I have already seen who I'm going to be tomorrow. So with all of that said, this superpower kryptonite model defined creativity and hyperfocus as the superpowers. So what basically, knowledge is power is what I'm going with. The idea is that I know that there are systems for people with ADHD. There are systems in which you can hyper-focus and you can accomplish things at a much greater rate. You can accomplish things that are far, far bigger than, say, somebody that does not hold that level of creativity or that level to bounce around ideas back and forth multiple times. I have a long way to go and a lot to learn, and I will keep you guys apprised of the entire journey. This is this is how we translate all of this. Okay. In the process of all of this, I have been struggling in a big, big way to not let things become a crutch, not let this become a crutch, not let this become an excuse for not performing. I still need to perform, and I still need to come up with tools in order for me to perform. And in doing so, I plan on making these things available to my listeners or my subscribers. And the idea here is that I need you to understand some of the things that I'm going to do to accomplish that. First of all, the initial action plan, right? The initial action plan is to stop developing AI. We still need to produce, and we still need to produce this business, and we still need to get somewhere. But one of the biggest roadblocks has been getting so bogged down with developing the tools to do that. We can just simply do it. We don't necessarily have to have a specific tool. As we begin to understand the process of doing the work, we can then begin to understand how to produce a tool that makes the work easier. So, time management is the number one problem that I face, though. And so we do time blocks. This is what most coaches would tell you to do. Block off all of your time into blocks. Protect certain periods of time for certain tasks so that you can make sure that you do, in fact, get those things done. Ooh, this is a big tool that I've been working on. But how do we keep this accurate? And how do we keep to this for somebody that does not view time in the same light as those that do, that could easily take their time blocks? So what I'm doing is I'm creating a worksheet that will allow me to set my schedule into blocks of time management. So I would do a Google search on time management and signal to noise ratio. And it will explain to you how we take, say you have 10 things to do. You take the top 3 things and you make this your entire focus. If you are to accomplish anything today, it is going to be those three things, and that is all that matters. When those 3 things are done, when they've been accomplished, you can move on to the noise. You can begin to look at the things that would otherwise create dysfunction in your time management. So a great example would be if you need to develop a business plan. And in addition to the business plan, you need to file for your LLC. And in addition to filing for your LLC, you also need to file for your tax ID or EIN. And in addition to that, you also need to file your business certificate. And you need to do those things. Okay, so now there's three things, but the number one thing, and this is the most important thing, this is where your signal would be, is your business plan. Because without your business plan, none of the other things matter. You can't begin to file for your LLC without having a full sense of what your business is and all the information that falls within a business plan. So you have to be able to do this. And so you're going to set up your time to knock everything else out. The business plan is where all your focus goes. You're going to put your phone on Do Not Disturb and maybe lock it in a drawer. You're going to turn your phone off. If you're in an office, you turn your phone off. Maybe forward all your calls to voicemail. If you happen to have a secretary, and I doubt many people listening to this podcast do, but if you have a secretary, you have them hold all your calls and make sure that nobody disturbs you for that time, that block of time that you have dedicated to doing, to focusing. And you hyper focus on the one thing. And so this is the only thing that you're going to work on. This is the signal to noise ratio. And you don't come up for air until you've finished. That means you don't look at your email. You don't look at the news. You don't look at anything. You only consider the one thing that you need to be working on. Signal to noise. So the noise is everything else. The noise is email. The noise is news. The noise is the conversation at the water cooler. The noise is the conversation with the missus or the mister at home. The noise has become the three AIs for me, so we're pushing the noise out. The single focus, of course, it became for me after creating this action plan was getting this particular episode out and protecting and then creating protected guardrails. So we create time blocks for directing a hyper-focus going forward. Signal to noise ratio to minimize kryptonite or chaos, frustration, distraction, so that the superpower can engage. And the tooling gap. The system confirms the need to look outside Gemini for a specialized tool to enhance behavioral change. So we will do research on other AI tools to achieve the functions of those that caused me so much grief last week. And so that then brings us to the end of this two-part series. In doing all of that, we also have to pay attention to the fact that we did go way overboard on our last episode, and it ended up being delayed by a couple of days in being published. And so in order to do this, we focus, of course, on the business and on all of our business tools and everything in between from Monday through Thursday. And then Friday is our day for deciding what we're going to record when we do our podcast. We may change that depending on, of course, bandwidth concerns. We seem to have had a problem with our bandwidth in this morning when I attempted to record. So I'm recording this a little bit later than I had intended to. I'm going to kind of wrap this up by pointing out a couple of things. The deal is that through my past, through the history and through this past couple of weeks, pushing through, which is typically how most people manage to get through their issues and able to accomplish the things that they set out to accomplish. Pushing through does not just simply work for me. If you ignore the problem that is, in fact, the problem with what you're trying to, that's getting in the way, you continue to ignore the problem only grows, and the problem only gets worse, it only gets harder, and you're making things far too hard on yourself, and you're making it far too hard to accomplish things. You are definitely taking a lot longer than you mean to, which is in and of itself creating its own set of problems for you. And all of these things. So brute force and pushing through, thinking that it's just because you're lazy or you're tired or whatever the deal is, does not simply work if with an ADD brain. And this is what we're coming to understand. Now, I have a whole lot of chapters left to read in my new favorite book, but in the process of doing that, we will continue to develop our plans. We will continue to work and see if we can't, in fact, figure things out before we get to the part that tells us this is how you can manage your time. Because we simply just can't stand still while we figure it out. We will continue to figure it out. This is, in fact, entrepreneurship to a T. You don't simply go into business, you figure out all the ways that you don't go into business. And so this is just another step. Today is just another step to become the person that I'm going to be tomorrow. And so now we understand that we have ADD. Now we understand that we do have, in fact, a different way of looking at things. But we also understand that it can be a very beautiful thing, because so much has come from people with ADD. So many great entrepreneurs and great minds of the past 150 years were probably minds with ADD. And so in knowing all of this, this is when the real work begins. This is when I begin to develop a system that is ADD aligned, and I turn my difference into my advantage, and I'm giving myself the grace and seeking the knowledge to become better. And in doing so I want to point out that I've developed a school group, and I'm going to wrap up with this. I've developed a school group. It is not ready for consumption, but I do want you to keep your eyes peeled. We will be probably generating a brand new website that looks like more than just a placeholder, in which I can capture all of my podcast episodes in your favorite places for streaming. But in addition to that, with this new website and design and all that, which is yet another thing, right? ADD mind. But point being is that in doing this, this will probably coincide with the opening of my school page. And yes, there will be a monthly fee. I need to pay for this, and it would be nice to begin earning some money aside. But I promise you, this isn't just going to be fluff. I'm going to provide you with tools to help you deal with your ADD if you have an ADD. It's not just going to be for ADD, though. It's going to be for business and for entrepreneurs. Everything that I'm learning along my journey, I plan on making available to you as well. And I'll be honest, the price I haven't locked in. I still haven't decided on it, but what I'm thinking about it being currently is really not much money. Chances are you spend way more per month on coffee. You probably spend way more on a streaming service. So keep all of that in mind, and I'd love to hype up what my next episode is. Chances are it's probably going to have more to do with ADD, or maybe it has to do with time management. Yeah, that's probably what it's going to be. I'm probably going to spend more time going over time management in my next episode. I really hope you guys join me again, and I want to thank you all once again. Thank you so very much for joining me along my journey, and for all that you do to encourage me on this journey. And I hope that we can continue to expect your support as we go through this journey. Please join me next week and continue to join me. And also, if you could, I would appreciate so very much, like, comment, share. Please post comments, all of these things. Even if you don't have anything to say, all you have to say is that maybe you found a hair out of place on my relatively bald head. My hair is starting to go. But maybe, whatever it is, I don't know. If you have something stupid to say, or something funny to say, or maybe something introspective to say, please, it helps. And the more comments, the more likes, the more shares, the more audience members we can possibly reach. And the more people that we reach, is the more chances that people who have who are approaching a similar life in a similar fashion to me, may find my podcast and inspiration behind what I'm doing, and in fact become great entrepreneurs themselves. And so with all of that said, thank you again for joining me, and I hope you have a fantastic week. Thank you so much.